Imagine turning on your computer and not having to think about drivers, licenses, updates, breaking things, viruses, or whether your system will slow down after a year. Imagine an operating system that simply works every day for school, work, gaming, creativity, browsing, and even for people who have never heard the word kernel in their life. That's the idea we're exploring today. A Linux distro made for 99% of people, not just today, but forever. Not a power user playground, not a niche experiment, but a true everyday operating system that could realistically replace Windows and macOS for almost everyone. For decades, Linux has carried a strange reputation. On one hand, it runs the internet, the cloud, supercomputers, phones, cars, smart TVs, and basically everything modern civilization depends on. On the other hand, on the desktop, it's been treated like a hobbyist's toy or a nerd-only club. That reputation didn't come from nowhere. Linux desktops used to require manual setup, confusing choices, broken hardware support, and a mindset that assumed users wanted to tinker. But something has quietly changed. Not overnight, not with a single release, but gradually, consistently, and now undeniably. The idea of a Linux distro for 99% of people starts with a simple principle. The user should not need to care that it's Linux. Most people don't care about file systems, init systems, package managers, or desktop environments. They care about whether their Wi-Fi works, whether their printer connects, whether Netflix plays in full HD, whether their games run smoothly, and whether their laptop battery lasts the whole day. For a long time, Linux failed this test too often. Today, it's passing more often than not. A distro made for everyone would start with installation. Not an installer that throws jargon at you, but one that asks only what actually matters. Language, keyboard layout, time zone, user account, and maybe whether you want to dual boot or replace your existing system. Everything else should be automatic. Partitioning should be safe and invisible. Encryption should be on by default, not as an advanced option hidden behind warnings. Secure boot should just work. The installer should finish in minutes, not because it's rushing, but because it's efficient and predictable. Once the system boots, the experience should feel familiar without being a clone. Familiarity matters. People are not stupid, but they are busy. An everyday Linux distro should respect muscle memory built over years of using computers, a taskbar or dock where you expect it, system settings that are logically organized, notifications that are informative without being annoying, and defaults that make sense. This doesn't mean copying Windows or macOS blindly, but it does mean understanding why certain design patterns exist and where they actually help users. Hardware support is where Linux has made some of its biggest silent gains. Today's kernels support an absurd range of devices out of the box. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, webcams, touchpads, high DPI displays, fingerprint readers, even many obscure laptop function keys now work without configuration. Graphics, once Linux's biggest weakness, has improved massively. AMD GPUs are practically plug-and-play. Intel graphics have been solid for years. Even NVIDIA, historically the most painful part of Linux graphics, has been slowly improving its Linux story, especially with newer drivers and Wayland support. For 99% of people, the hardware they buy today will simply work. An ultimate everyday operating system also needs sane updates. This is where Linux can actually outperform proprietary systems. Instead of massive disruptive updates that reboot your system for an hour, Linux updates are usually small, fast, and incremental. A distro made for everyone would take this further by offering stable releases that don't change behavior unexpectedly, combined with long-term support. Updates should be boring, because boring updates are good. Security fixes should be automatic. Feature changes should be opt-in or clearly explained. The user should never feel like the system is fighting them. Software availability used to be the biggest argument against Linux on the desktop. That argument is weaker than it has ever been. Browsers, office suites, media players, communication apps, code editors, and creative tools are widely available. For the few proprietary applications that still don't support Linux natively, containerized formats like Flatpak and Snap, along with compatibility layers like Wine and Proton, have filled the gap far more effectively than most people realize. Steam's Proton alone has changed the gaming landscape on Linux beyond recognition. Games that were once Windows only now run with little or no effort. For an everyday user, the question is no longer, can I do this on Linux? But why wouldn't I? A distro made for 99% of people would also embrace app stores that make sense, not fragmented repositories with inconsistent interfaces, but a unified software center where users can search, install, update, and remove applications easily. Ratings, screenshots, descriptions, and permissions should be visible and understandable. Flatpak-style sandboxing is especially important here. It gives users a level of security and isolation that traditional desktop operating systems often lack, without forcing them to think about it. Security itself should be mostly invisible. Linux already has a strong security model, but an everyday distro would package it in a way that feels reassuring rather than intimidating. Firewalls enabled by default, automatic security updates, sensible permission prompts, no antivirus pop-ups screaming about threats that don't exist. Instead of fear-based security, Linux offers quiet confidence, and that's exactly what most users want. Performance is another area where a Linux distro for everyone shines. Linux systems tend to age gracefully. They don't slow down dramatically over time. They don't accumulate hidden background processes designed to sell you something. On older hardware, Linux can feel like a second life for a machine that Windows has already abandoned. On new hardware, Linux is fast, responsive, and efficient. Battery life, once a weak point, has improved dramatically thanks to kernel optimizations, better power management, and vendor cooperation. An everyday operating system also needs to respect the user's data. This is an area where Linux has a philosophical advantage. No forced online accounts, no telemetry that can't be disabled, no advertising baked into the operating system. A distro made for 99% of people would make privacy the default, not a hidden setting. The system should work fully offline. Cloud integration should exist, but as an option, not a requirement. The user should feel like the computer belongs to them, not the other way around. One of the most underrated strengths of Linux is consistency. A well-designed distro doesn't change direction every few years based on marketing trends. It evolves, but it doesn't reinvent itself constantly. This is critical for an operating system meant to last forever. Users should be able to install it today and still feel at home years later. Files should be where you expect them. Settings shouldn't move randomly. Shortcuts shouldn't change just because a new design team wanted to freshen things up. Support matters too, especially for non-technical users. A Linux distro for 99% of people would rely not only on documentation, but on a welcoming community and clear official guidance. Help articles written in plain language, forums that don't assume the user already knows everything, error messages that explain what went wrong and how to fix it. The culture around the distro matters as much as the code itself. The idea of forever is important here. Technology moves fast, but people don't want to relearn their operating system every year. A truly universal Linux distro would offer long-term support releases that are maintained for many years. Businesses, schools, families, and individuals should be able to rely on it without fear that it will suddenly be abandoned or radically changed. Linux already excels at this on servers. Bringing that mindset fully to the desktop is one of its greatest strengths. Accessibility cannot be an afterthought. Screen readers, high-contrast modes, large text, keyboard navigation, and assistive technologies need to be first-class features. An operating system for everyone truly means everyone. Linux desktops have made big strides here, but a distro aimed at 99% of people would make accessibility visible, easy to configure, and well-documented. Then there's customization, one of Linux's classic selling points. Ironically, too much customization can be a downside for everyday users. The trick is balance. A good distro offers customization without forcing it. The defaults should be good enough that most people never feel the need to change anything. But for those who want to tweak, personalize, or theme their system, the option is there, without breaking stability or usability. Education is another subtle advantage. Using Linux teaches users gently that computers don't have to be opaque black boxes controlled by corporations. Even without diving deep, people learn that their system is flexible, transparent, and respectful. This doesn't mean turning everyone into a developer, but it does mean empowering users rather than locking them in. When you look at the direction proprietary operating systems are heading, the contrast becomes sharper. More ads, more subscriptions, more forced accounts, more data collection, more artificial restrictions. Linux, especially a distro designed for everyday use, represents the opposite philosophy. It says the computer is a tool, not a service. It exists to serve the user, not to monetize them. What's fascinating is that such a Linux distro doesn't need revolutionary technology. Almost all the pieces already exist. Stable kernels, mature desktop environments, universal app formats, excellent hardware support, and a global community of developers and users. The challenge is not invention, but integration, bringing everything together with a clear vision focused on normal people, not edge cases or ideological purity. For many users, switching to Linux today is already surprisingly painless. They install it, set up their browser, sign into their accounts, install a few apps, and then they forget about the operating system. And that's the highest compliment you can give an OS. It fades into the background and lets you get on with your life. A Linux distro made for 99% of people forever wouldn't be loud or flashy. It wouldn't brag about being for hackers or for professionals only. It would quietly become the computer people recommend to their parents, their kids, their friends, and their coworkers. The system that doesn't break, the system that respects you, the system that just works. We're closer to that reality than most people realize. Not in some distant future, but right now. The question is no longer whether Linux can be an everyday operating system. The question is how long it will take for the rest of the world to notice that it already is.